Hello everyone, on behalf of Aberdeen Performing Arts and the Festival partners, a very warm welcome to Granite Noir. I'm Teresa Talbot, I'm a crime writer and a podcaster. I'm delighted you've joined us for this event. It's part of the digital staging of Aberdeen's International Crime Writing Festival. Now, although we can't be together in person, online events have just proved invaluable over this past year, and they've opened up festivals to a whole new audience. Now, I'm joining you today from Glasgow, but Aberdeen is my adopted home city. I have very, very fond memories of working there every Sunday at Beech Grove Studio presenting Radio Scotland's gardening programme. And the event you're watching now is being BSL interpreted on a separate feed, so a huge thanks to our interpreter, Leslie. Now, podcasts have helped many of us through lockdown, and crime podcasts seem to be especially popular, and the appetite for true crime is on the rise. It appears we just can't get enough of it. So today I have the pleasure of chatting to two fellow podcasters who are prepared to dig deep and deliver the very best that true crime has to offer. So let me introduce to you now Candice Gaines, the host of Crime Noir, which focuses on missing and murdered Black women and men in America. And she's joining us now from her home in West Virginia. And joining Candice is international television presenter and journalist Isla Traquair, host of the Storyteller, Violent Delights, who's set slightly closer in Wiltshire. So Candice and Isla, welcome. It's so lovely.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Same.
Now, Candice, I have to ask, what time is it where you are?
It is 9:01 a.m. and I'm actually in Virginia, not West.
Oh, goodness, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I get all carried away. And Isla, obviously you're within our own time zone, so you haven't had to get up at the crack of dawn and get all suited. Now, before we delve deeper and find out all the nuts and bolts about the podcast, can you tell us a wee bit about the podcast that you host? Candice, I'll let you go first. Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
So, hi everyone that's listening. My name is Candice. I am the host of Crime Noir, the podcast, which is a podcast that focuses on missing and murdered Black women and men. I decided to start my podcast because I love true crime. I went to school for forensic science. It's my passion. But I did notice a lack of coverage in our media regarding cases of Black women and men and children and other marginalized identities within our community. And I wanted to just fill that void. And I just decided to start one. And it's been really cool to impact people and reach people to, help get justice or exposure for other victims of crime.
Well, I will come on to that in a few moments, and how crimes against people of colour have been either underreported or maybe neglected by mainstream media. Isla, tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Well, first of all, I want to say, Candice, I love what you do. Well done. So my podcast, the series is, well, there was series 1, The Storyteller, Murder Most Foul, which focused on the first ever big murder case that I covered as a journalist. I was a newspaper reporter in Aberdeen, and it was the 20th anniversary when I did that podcast. It sort of happened by accident, a phone call that then just led on to this snowball, which took up about 8 months of my life every single day and was all consuming. And then the second series, which just finished broadcasting a couple of months ago, is The Storyteller, Violent Delights, which also focuses on another northeast of Scotland case, a very different case. It was one from 1968. The first series was one from 1999. So, but both of them are deep dives. I mean, real deep dives. And I go back and I find all the people who are involved in the cases, those at the heart of it, those who are investigating it. And I find out the truth beyond headlines. And I'm really interested in moving cases on and finding out something that will, closure can never be found, I don't think, with murder, but at least a step closer to that, at least.
Again, I'll come on to the sort of machinations of, your research and things that you'd uncovered during the podcast. But What is it about true crime that seems to resonate with listeners? Isla, I'll let you go first on this one.
I think everyone has a little bit of morbid fascination. And I think that actually the truth is we are all capable of murder where the right buttons to be pushed. I mean, obviously extreme situations. But I think people are fascinated how sometimes normal people with normal lives can either end up dead or end up in court. And I think there's an element of that. There's a little bit of voyeurism there as well, I think, as well, that we all like to kind of, it's a bit like rubbernecking past a car crash, you know, there's a little bit of that. But I think it's a fascination with the human beings, really, people and their stories.
Candice, has that been your experience?
Yes, I actually agree with mostly everything she said. I think people they want to know why. Why is this happening? Why would somebody do something? I mean, at least for me speaking, I want to know why. Like, why would you harm a child? Why would you kill your wife? Why would you do this? Why would you do that? I mean, I think people want to know why. I genuinely do. And I think, like you said, people, when they drive past an accident, they want to see what happened, no matter how gruesome it may be.
Now, Candice, you said you've always been interested in crime. Where is that where that interest stemmed from?
Yes, I think I mean, I'm not a psychologist, therapist, or anything like that, but most people, at least I believe, are inherently good. Yes, we might, falter, but then you have people who are seemingly good on the outside. They've had an ideal life and they still they still do heinous crimes. So yeah, I always want to know why.
So you said that you were interested in crime and you were giving a voice to those forgotten victims, the Black women and men in America. So explain about how you can give them a voice through your podcast.
Well, I find watching the media, the most sensationalized crimes or that receive the most coverage do not look like me at all. And layer that with them being from a poor background or they don't have education, they're unmarried. I feel like it just doesn't show in our media, or it's just like a little blurb. Whereas someone who might look like you guys, they receive a lot more coverage. It blows up internationally, regardless of if they're poor or whatever the case may be. So I wanted to use my voice and try to fill in that gap. I'm just one person. So yes, it needs to, come across from everywhere, every media, but hey, if I can, use it, I'm going to do it.
How does that make you feel? I mean, I've been a news journalist. How does it make you feel when you don't feel that you're being represented in the news?
It makes me sad. It makes me sad because I always wonder what could have happened, or what, especially with unsolved cases, had they received a tenth of coverage as someone else, would it be solved? Will we have more information, especially in those vital moments when they first disappear? So, or, their bodies first found, or whatever the case may be. Yeah, it makes me sad. It makes me sad.
Isla, let me come on to you. Now, Violent Delights, as you mentioned, it follows on from the first series of The Storyteller. You go really, really deeply into one of Scotland's most infamous murders, the death of, or the killing of wealthy farmer Maxwell Garvie. Why did you choose this one?
Well, lots of reasons. I knew about this case. I mean, obviously it happened long before I was born, but I knew about this case when I was very young because my mum was a student in Aberdeen and she actually bunked off university to go and attend, and she was there on one of the days that Sheila Garvie, one of the co-accused, was giving evidence. So
I probably should say, give us a potted history of the case for those who are aware of the murder of Maxwell Garvie.
Okay, have you got 3 hours? That's the condensed version. Okay, so
You're on the clock.
Maxwell Garvie was a wealthy farmer. He was known as the Flying Farmer because he had a private plane. He drove fast cars. He wasn't your typical farmer. He was a gentleman farmer, and had this very beautiful wife and 3 children. She was very glamorous and they were very well known. I would say they were kind of like an it couple for sure. And he went missing. And to begin with, there wasn't a huge amount of concern because he was a little bit of a character, shall we say, and, liked to party. So it wasn't that unusual for him to sort of go AWOL. But months and months passed and rumours started to grow. And eventually what happened was it was Sheila's own mother who went to the police and tipped them off, saying that Maxwell was dead. And the story that unravelled after that, I don't think there's ever been a case like it, not just in the northeast of Scotland, but really in the UK, that has captured the attention. There was hundreds of people queuing up outside the court every day. So there was 3 accused. There was Sheila Garvie, 33, and then there was Brian Tevendale, who was a young guy, and he was 21, I think, at the time of the court case, and that was her lover. Not how you expect a love triangle to come about, though. Max actually orchestrated their coming together. And then there was a third chap, Alan Peters, who was a young guy, and he got dragged in. He was a work colleague of Brian's and went along to help do the deed and get rid of the body. So the body was found 3 months after the murder. He was hidden in a tunnel on the grounds of a castle. So there was all these elements to it, added to the fact that Sheila used to work for the royal family out in Balmoral. And the story,
it's got all the elements, isn't it, of what people, it's like a soap opera.
It's really remarkable. I mean, if I wrote it as a fiction, people would be like, come on, that's a little bit too far. But it was fascinating. What emerged was there was the nudist colonies, there was a cottage called Kinky Cottage, there was so many aspects to it.
Right. I need to backtrack here, and Candice, please feel free to come in and ask Isla, because this is absolutely fascinating. I want to backtrack. You said the way that Sheila and her lover came together, Maxwell had orchestrated that, he'd brought them together. How does that happen? How did he introduce his wife to her lover?
It was literally grooming. He identified Brian as was a good-looking young guy, and they met on an SNP outing. And there was certainly evidence from multiple people that perhaps Max had homosexual tendencies. But he definitely got off on his wife being with another man. And he literally pushed her naked into the spare bedroom where Brian was spending the night, and locked the door. And that was the first time that they were intimate together. But what happened was these two sort of people who were being groomed ended up falling in love. And the puppet master eventually lost control, and that's all went horribly wrong. But what I think is really important to say is that this, of course, for obvious reasons, grabbed the headlines, and you can imagine what they said. And Sheila was very much painted as some sort of femme fatale. I think women are often, if they are the murderer, they're painted as either mad or bad. But the reality is, and this is what I was really keen to kind of uncover, and I think, prove beyond doubt that this was the case, that she was actually a victim of quite serious coercive control. She was in an abusive marriage, and back in those days, you didn't get the support that you would nowadays. She had her local doctor, the police, her family, even the local hotel manager. When she tried to escape, they all pushed her back to her abusive husband. And I think she ended up in a corner and didn't know what else to do. And she was told, in no uncertain terms, you can't get divorced. You, in the eyes of the law, are an adulteress. So I'm not saying for 1 second murder was the answer, but I can see she was in a highly stressed and triggered situation with no way out.
And the fact that Maxwell was so wealthy, I'm assuming that people thought that she was quite lucky, maybe, to have such a lovely lifestyle. I mean, she probably had a lifestyle that other people envied, in inverted commas.
100%. And there were so many layers to this story. The judgment of people of her, also because of the way she looked as well. You know, if you're attractive as well, you do get judged in a particular way. And I don't think many people had a clue as to what was going on in her life. But I actually get Laura Richards, who's one of the world's leading criminal behavioural analysts, to go back and go over the case with me. And she said, with absolute certainty, this was a serious case of coercive control. And had the situation occurred nowadays, she'd have got support. She'd have been able to get divorced, and probably, there wouldn't have been a murder committed.
Oh, but we will come back, obviously, Isla. Candice, I mean, you've been listening to that. That's just such it's such a high-profile case. But you're studying cases that aren't high-profile, that don't make the headlines for all the wrong reasons. Is there a part? I'll need to word this very carefully. Is there an element, because we're not seeing the crimes against people of colour, they're not being represented properly, they're not being shown in the media? Is there a lack of empathy then within societies in general, that we're not seeing things happening, we're not seeing the reality? And there's less empathy toward victims because we don't really know that they're out there.
Yes, I believe there's a lack of empathy there for some people regarding Black women and men. I mean, if you look at the history of racism in America, that has a lot to play with how we are still viewed today. So the short answer is absolutely yes. Now, when we get my dissertation popping, I can go the long answer. But
on you go, sister. Come on.
Yeah, but yes, I definitely think even if you look at other studies, like academic studies about how some doctors view Black pain, they say we have a higher threshold, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the data is out there to suggest that there is a lack of empathy for Black victims, even in the medical community. So yes.
And when you were doing your podcast, tell me some of the cases, or was there one particular case that struck a chord with you? Was there one case that you thought, oh, crikey, this is a story that needs to be told?
Well, I actually have two cases, but I'm just going to speak on the one that actually got completely closed out this week. I spoke on a woman or a girl by the name of Alexis Murphy. She actually disappeared from Virginia, which is where I'm from, but not the same part. She disappeared in August 2013. She was 17 years old, and she disappeared with this man named Randy Taylor. They found her hair, blood on his t-shirt, her fingernails, and her cell phone on his property. However, her body was not found until this year. Her body was found December 2020. They just announced this past week that they found it. He was tried without her body and convicted of murder and kidnapping, and he was sentenced to life in prison. That case impacted me because she's from Virginia. I was a 17-year-old girl at one point, carefree, doing what I want to do. Her Twitter is still up, and she was excited for like taking senior pictures and just getting ready to like start her new phase in life. And it was just really sad to see. I'm glad the family got closure by finding her body. But it's just still sad to know that this 17-year-old girl's life was cut short by some creep. Just sad.
I mean, it's heartbreaking, and I can hear the emotion in your voice, and I can see how it's affected you. And something that with true crime is that often it's just a name on a headline or another story and another horror story, and next week, you know, we'll be reading about some other atrocity. But when you can see someone on, you know, you see their Twitter feeds, and you think, this is someone with a life. And so tell me, how do the families, if you're chatting to the families of someone who's missing or a murder victim, how do you get close to the families, or do you, is there ever a sense that you feel intrusive?
For me, I let them reach out to me. I don't want to, because you never know where people are at in their grief or their journey working through this. They could be having a perfectly good day, and you don't want to be, hey, I heard your son was murdered. I'm Candice Gaines. Can I please cover your son's case? They might not be at that point right now. And so I just let them come to me. Like if they want their show covered, then I will do it. But I feel intrusive to go to them because I don't know where they're at with things.
Isla, you know, who did you interview as part of the podcast into Maxwell Garvie's killing? Did you have to speak to family members, people who were affected?
Yeah, I mean, the tricky one with this case is because of the age, a lot of people are dead. So yeah, I spoke to, I mean, it was incredible. I got people who have never spoken before. One of the police officers who was the first down into the tunnel when the body was found. A female police officer who just graduated from police college, who her first task was escorting Sheila to court and sat beside her in the trial and was there when she was found guilty. You know, you basically I try and find out the facts from the people from the horse's mouth, and that's why it's really important to try and get everyone to talk. Now, the couple had 3 children. Sadly, the eldest has since passed on, and the other 2 were very young at the time. And you know, like Candice said, you've got to be respectful of families' wishes. And I respected their desire not to take part. And I understand it's something that they might not wanted to, perhaps have been told. But I think it was actually important to rewrite the story and the narrative, actually, because the legacy that was left was not a good one for her family, and actually for grandchildren. I hope that they would listen to it and maybe learn more about, it must be a bit of a stain on their family's history. And I understand that. And there must be a shame attached to that as well. And I thought it was really important to actually look at them as human beings and see people are complex. And I think that hopefully, if they do ever listen, that'll be something that they will be glad that I've done. In my first series, I worked very, very closely with the mother of murder victim, Susan Patrick's mother, and her daughter was Melanie Burton. And this woman had been in a state of torment for 20 years.
Again, can you give us a brief history?
Yeah, sure.
Background rather to this case.
Another unique case. So Melanie Sturton was a young care assistant at a nursing home in Aberdeen, and she grew up in Ballater. She was very shy. She had partial facial paralysis, and and she was, a character among those that she was close with, but quite shy. And she'd moved into Aberdeen, which was a big deal. And her mother and stepfather went away off on holiday. They couldn't get hold of her, and it was a couple of days after that the police finally went and basically got access into her property on Great Western Road, which is quite a nice part of Aberdeen. And what they discovered behind the door, I'm not sure how graphic knowledge to go to, but it was absolutely horrific. She'd almost head decapitated. It was a frenzied attack. She'd been stabbed so many times. It was just absolutely horrific, and I think it did actually traumatize a lot of the investigation team. I spoke to the pathologist, the lead forensic officer, those people who, hours and hours, and they were working on this non-stop day and night, trying to find a resolution to this case. And of course, because of the level of violence, they'd assumed that it was a man. There was all sorts of red herrings. The stepfather was under suspicion because he had a military background. But of course, he was in Spain at the time, but could he have done it before he left? And there was all these other red herrings about a man jogging, etc. Anyway, 10 days after the murder, clues pointed to a young woman, 20 years old, who lived upstairs. She was a chef at quite a nice restaurant in Aberdeen. And when she was then brought in for questioning, at the same time, simultaneously, they were looking in her flat, and they found a couple of black bin liners and literally every piece of forensic evidence, like almost wrapped up perfectly for them. The chef's boning knife, her bloodied clothes, all the items stolen from Melanie's flat. Melanie did not have anything of monetary value, really. Things like 50 pence off a hairspray coupon, a Marks and Spencer's voucher. There was nothing. This was not really robbery. It was difficult to find that as a motive. So that was the kind of essence of it. Pamela Gurley, the 20-year-old neighbour, admitted to police that she had done it. And then just before she was due to go on trial, and actually she was going to plead guilty, she changed her plea to not guilty, and she tried to blame it on her then very new boyfriend that she'd been seeing at the time. During the court case, it was revealed there's absolutely no way he was involved, but she tried to pin it on him. So there was a huge impact on the lives that were affected and the living victims who were left behind, for 20 years. So my role, and it was a privilege to do this for Susan and for Chris Taylor and the family, was to go back and look over the facts and then try and get some answers. And I ultimately did go and knock on Pamela Gurley's door. She's been out of prison for some years now. She did 14 years in jail. And yes, I appreciate she served her time. She's on, she got a life sentence, so she's on parole effectively for the rest of her life. And she's living a very normal life. But it was important for me, and I don't want to give too much away, but there's a healing and conclusion found that I just had not expected that I would arrive at on the day that I started doing this podcast. And it was a huge personal and professional journey for me. And I'm pleased to say it has changed the lives of Susan and Chris and his family very positively, and given them both a sense of peace that the truth is out there in the full story. Because as a newspaper journalist at the time covering it, even though there was masses of column inches, we just didn't really ever get to the bottom of it. And also, as someone who makes documentaries, even though you can go into quite a bit of detail, an hour long documentary, you still don't get the same level. So 19 episodes for series 1, I covered everything. And I think that listeners love, they follow me on the journey. They're with me when I'm arriving in that place, knocking on the door, they're experiencing it with me. And I think that's why people love podcasts so much as well.
Now, Isla, you're breaking up very, very slightly. So it's just, I think it's just a very slight internet connection, but we hopefully everyone heard that loud and clear. Candice, I'll come to you and touch on what Isla said about closure, and you did mention it briefly as we chatted previously. Do you find, have you found that families have welcomed the podcast because, or further investigation, because not only will it give them closure, but they're maybe getting the attention, they're getting the interest that was lacking from mainstream media and from the legal system?
Yes, I've had maybe like 3 or 4 families reach out to me and say they're appreciative of my podcast. Again, I'm not like a journalist or anything. I'm a blogger. I just research true crime and put it out there. But I do it from a victim's advocate's standpoint versus just like, there's different genres, there's true comedy, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I would say they're appreciative of getting exposure for their cases. And if I ever have a family say they don't want it up, I would have no problem taking it down, no questions asked, no anything.
And tell me, how do you protect yourself? I mean, emotionally, because you're entrenched in these stories that they're quite horrific and highly emotional. You're dealing with victims' families. How do you, when you go home, how do you protect yourself? What kind of self-care can you give? Candice.
Oh, you're talking to me. I thought you were talking to her. I'm sorry.
I'll go on to Isla. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I thought you were talking to her. For me, I decompress. I have a dog. I play with my dog. I just graduated from nail school. I do my nails. I give myself a pedicure. And sometimes I pray. It's sad. Like, you're consuming negativity like all the time. I read about true crime all day, every day, about people being killed, children getting harmed, which is really pulls on my heartstring. Or sometimes I just pour me a mimosa. I mean, it is what it is.
Sometimes that it comes down to something as basic as that. Have a glass of wine and try and switch off. Isla, likewise, I mean, as a news journalist, you covered fairly grim stories as well, but with the podcast, you're getting so deeply entrenched in these crimes. Do you go? Yeah. Can you switch off?
No, I mean, I had to learn as a journalist. I had to learn. I mean, I was covering everything, murders and fatal accidents and all sorts from a really young age. So I definitely developed a technique of building a wall, but I don't think that was actually particularly healthy. So I did step away from covering the crime stuff for a while, and when I was over in the States. With the podcasts, I mean, there's a difference. I'm there live on the scene when things happen, and I would, go to the court case and do all that. And it's just fully absorbing, and that's hard. I did the Ipswich prostitute serial killer. I was there when they found the last 2 bodies, and you definitely find moments when you're going to your bed exhausted, and you're having these. I never meet the victims, so you've got these, like, the photographs that get released, a passport photo. I had these 5 images of actually these women who'd lost their lives, or someone's daughter. And particularly that case, they're prostitutes. So a bit like what Candice was talking about, when there's lack of empathy, there's definitely lack of empathy and judgment based on what your life is. And we all know if someone's rich and looks a certain way or has a certain job, there's definitely more sympathy. With regards to the podcasts, I mean, honestly, it's not particularly healthy. I am fully absorbed. I eat, sleep, breathe it. I don't take days off. I work from 7 a.m. till 2 a.m. This is particularly when I'm at the point of editing. Going to do the interviews. In normal situations, I would go, you do it face to face, and I spend a period of time going and meeting people, seeing things, going there. Due to COVID, for the last series, all of it was done over the phone or video calls, which was quite challenging. But I did go to the locations safely within the guidelines of COVID to see certain places. But once I get into that stage of editing, and I really just touched the tip of the iceberg with the Garvie case, and I could swivel my computer around. This is the wall with my notes of how complex this was. So, my friends, they know that they just lose me and my family, and you know, they say, are you sleeping? Are you eating? And yeah, I mean, I don't sleep very much. It's massive, and I have to decompress at the end of it. I actually wrote a book on the first series, and I wrote it at the end of, you know, the podcast going out, and I wrote it nonstop for a week, and I barely slept. And then I shut the computer, and I'll be honest, I have barely looked back at it because I needed time to breathe from it. I will go back and edit it at some point, but you know, it's certainly not for the faint-hearted. And I fell into this line accidentally, the crime specialism, but I do feel it's a privilege, and I feel, you know, it's an honor as a storyteller, and I have the strength of character to go into those really dark places, experience that, and witness that raw grief. But I hope what I do is, and I found this with the cases I've covered, I will find sometimes the brightest light of humanity in those darkest places. The people who reach out with kindness to those families, or, you know, you'll find something in there that does give you hope amid such fairly grim and horrific circumstances.
Now, we're getting questions in from the audience, so if you just excuse me, Bertie's asked, Isla, are there other Northeast crimes you plan to explore on the Storyteller? Have you got anything kind of ticking away?
Yes.
Bertie, I think she's kind of been a bit cagey here.
No, there's legal reasons why I can't go into it, but yes, there will be other Northeast cases, and there will be other cases from far away as well. And I'm afraid I can't reveal at this stage, because there's actually some ongoing legal stuff that does not allow me to talk about it. But yes, there will be more, definitely.
Can I add something?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I wanted to say, you touched on a good point about decompressing. I noticed that, like, now that I do a true crime podcast, I'm not engaging with crime documentaries or other true crime things in the way that I used to. Back before I started, I would watch crime all the time, sun up, sun down. But now I just find myself only consuming what, like, content I'm putting out, or just like that.
That's a really interesting point then. Do you feel then that you're more sated by what you're doing yourself, so you don't feel that need to tap in?
I just think it's so overload, at least from my perspective. It's like, okay, I'm already reading about horror for my cases that leave me sick to my stomach. And then now I'm about to just, on my lounge time, I can't just consume a true crime documentary the same way that I used to. Now, sometimes my listeners, they want me to watch a documentary with them and discuss it with them. I have no problem doing that. But typically on my leisure time, I'm not consuming it like I used to do before I started my podcast.
So, Candice, one question, I think we kind of almost covered this. Of all the cases, this is coming in from one of the viewers, of all the cases you've covered, does one continue to haunt you?
Yes. It's about I live in Northern Virginia, which is on the border of Washington, D.C. In 2014, a Black girl by the name of Relisha Rudd she disappeared. She was homeless at the time. She was poor. I mean, it barely made anything outside of local news. She wasn't reported missing by her mother. It was actually, I guess, the education system that reported her missing because she had missed so much of school. The person she was last seen with was a janitor at the homeless shelter, and he has a criminal record. He actually, when police were closing in on him and wanted to interview him, he actually killed his wife and himself. And Relisha has never been seen or heard from since. She's still missing as of today. So that's one case that I hope in my lifetime we see some kind of closure, whatever that looks like, her body being found, her being found alive. That's what I'm hoping for.
Now, I was going to ask about the nuts and bolts of podcasting and how you go about it, how you start, but someone's actually asked, it's Ethan has said, how would you advise a new podcaster to start, and how do you go about finding an audience? Okay, Ethan, if we knew that. So Isla, can you help Ethan out?
Gosh. Well, I mean, there's all sorts of different types of podcasts, so it depends what style you want to do. I mean, and there's audiences for all. Candice and I have, very different styles, but, we've got our own audiences, because some people like the one case per episode. Mm-hmm. And then other people like the deep dives and hearing the lots of other interviews, and other people like ones where there's two hosts having a conversation about it. So, I mean, to do one yourself, it's all about the content and the stories. So it's doing research and finding the good cases, fact-checking, investigating, making sure you've got everything right. I mean, there's no hard and fast rules. I mean, when it comes to the technical stuff, you obviously need to know how to do that. I'm lucky because of my background in television. I actually know how to edit video, and I have a fairly advanced software system. I use Avid, which most people, I don't think we know how to use. I did a lot of training on it, and I don't know if it's a preferred one for just audio, but it's super advanced, and I know how to get the exact, to get any breath out or whatever. So the technical side of editing, and I do everything. I research, produce, edit, present, everything. I record it all. I've got all my mics and stuff. So you need to invest a bit, perhaps. I mean, you can do things pretty cheaply. You can record stuff on your phone if you want, but if you want good quality, I think people do actually like good quality, because when you're in their ears, they want to hear properly.
It's a very intimate medium. I mean, my background's radio, so it's like that. It's such an intimate medium that you don't get visually, isn't it? But Isla, you work with an actor as well, don't you?
No, well, for series 2, I did have actors, because so many people involved in the case are dead. The majority of all the main characters are dead. And what I felt was so key was that this court case, which was covered almost verbatim in the local newspaper, the transcript's absolutely fascinating. And I felt, well, it's better just to hear it from the horse's mouth. And the best way I could do that was by getting voice actors. And it was an absolute honour that BAFTA award-winning actress Kate Dickie, who I adore, she was a fan of series 1. And I contacted her via Twitter and said, Kate, will you be the voice of Sheila Garvie for series 2? And without hesitation, she said yes. She then, bless her, because she's such a pro, we spent about, because I sent her, the stuff from the court, etc., that I wanted her to read out and record. And of course, this is during COVID, so she was having to record it into her phone. And she said, the actor in me will not allow me to just read this out loud. I need to get under her skin. So we had a many conversations, but I give her the every detail I possibly knew about this person. And I think anyone who's listened would, agree that she captured her essence absolutely beautifully. The first time when I got the recording through, I was out walking my dog and I burst out crying when I heard those words. Yeah.
That's so cool what you do. I think that's very, very cool. That's goals.
Right.
But if you're like me, I would say just do it. I mean, I think it matters why you're doing it. If you care about giving a voice to the voiceless, then just reaching one person is a good thing. And I think once you keep that at the core, again, depending what kind of true crime podcast you're looking for, hey, when one person listens to it, that's a win. 10 people start listening. Wow, 100, woo, 1,000, I'm up there. I mean, that's how I think of it. I'm like, I'm just happy somebody's listening to me. I mean, I would say, be happy where you're at. Like you said, investing in good equipment, which is something I need to do. I'm still working off of my original equipment, but as the podcast continues to grow, I would love to invest in more higher tech equipment. So yeah, I think that is very good tips that you gave.
We've got so many questions coming through, and so I'm kind of amalgamating questions now. I'm condensing 2 or 3 to make the one question. And this is something again that I was going to come to, but Elizabeth has asked. The Black Lives Matter. We've had a lot of publicity for the BLM campaigns recently. Has that improved? The reporting, has it improved any? Do people of colour within the community feel that they're being taken seriously, or their crimes against them are being taken seriously, or has it not quite made the dent that you hoped it had?
Well, I don't consider myself a spokesperson for the entire Black community, but I would say no, for my personal opinion, because we're still seeing, cases of police brutality where the perpetrators are not being held accountable in the way that they need to be held accountable. So I would say, from my own personal opinion, no, I don't think it's help, or the adjectives of Black Lives Matter has helped, or the relationship between the police and the Black community has improved. Now, what I do see is that more people are being aware of what's happening and maybe seeing the injustice that's happening and being outraged by it. So I do think it has some good going on as well.
And Candice, you put the victims at foremost of your podcast, as you have, Isla. You put the victims foremost. You're reclaiming the narrative, because it's almost, as you said, that they were forgotten. So is this what you set out to do, reclaim the narrative for these victims and give them agency?
I do. And it sounds like Isla does too. I mean, I think that's very important. I don't know if people realize it, but we live in a very victim blamey society where you could be completely a victim, and they'll say, well, what were you wearing? Or why were you drinking this? Or why did you say hi to him? Or why didn't you say hi to him? Or why did you have your hoodie up? If you didn't have your hoodie down, the police wouldn't have stopped you. I mean, yeah, I'd like to say that I try to put my victims first, because I know what kind of society we live in, that any minor indiscretion could have you crucified, even when you're a victim.
Isla, you've obviously given your victims agency, and you've regarded Sheila Garvie as one of those victims, and that's not to take away from the murder of Maxwell Garvie.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything Candice said, by the way. I think, oh my gosh, victim blaming. Wow, yeah. Actually, I want to be...
But why does that happen? Even, when someone's been murdered, someone's been killed, it's almost a stigma. Where does that come from?
It's so systemic. It's so deeply ingrained. 100% agree. People of color, oh my gosh, your child's gone missing. Oh, well, they've run away. And then Madeleine McCann, you know what I mean? Things are treated so differently. John Bernay Ramsey is one of the most famous unsolved cases in the US. Look at it. You couldn't get more kind of, little, sorry, I have absolute sympathy for her family and loved ones who lost her. But
yeah, and just to recap, that's the child who'd been in beauty pageants, or they're called in America, but the pageants, very, very high profile.
Yes, 100%. So I think that it's it boils down, actually, I hate to say it, down to the patriarchy of the way that women are treated. Laura Richards, who I interviewed, she's got a brilliant new podcast out called Crime Analyst, and it's looking into the Peter Sutcliffe murders. And she's doing something really important. She says, let's stop calling them the Ripper. Let's stop sensationalizing and focusing on these killers. Let's look at the victims and look what happened. And when she goes back and looks over these cases, oh my gosh, these women, if they were out drinking, that's it. Oh, well, they deserved it. It was just, they weren't given, and the ones who survived, the ones who were attacked or raped, again, it was judgment. And this is what we have to start changing our language. We have to start changing the way we look at them. And we are all guilty of judgment. We are all guilty of that. As soon as we know, even George Floyd, it's like they were trying to justify, but he'd been involved in or he'd done something wrong once in his life. This is not about whether someone is good or bad or has been perfect in life. This is about right and wrong.
Yes.
And
add something to that? I'm sorry.
No, Candice, I was just going to say, for anyone that's not aware, Isla was, and for anyone not aware of the what was one of the most infamous crimes in the UK, was the Peter Sutcliffe, who was dubbed the Yorkshire Ripper. And one narrative that came through from the police, he mainly targeted sex workers, and one awful narrative from one of the investigating officers, another two women who he'd killed. But that was a shame. They were completely innocent women. And that was a real turning point that I think people thought, well, what are sex workers not, do they deserve to die? So that's what Isla was referring to. So sorry, Candice.
And that's exactly what I was going to say too. You said it perfectly, that even these serial killers or people who commit crimes, they know who to target because they know people aren't going to care. There's been how many serial killers that specifically target sex workers because they know nobody is looking for them, or if they do get murdered and found, they're going to be like, well, you shouldn't have been a sex worker. You just because you don't agree with somebody's profession does not mean they cannot be a victim of crime. And that is one thing I hate about our society, is that they take, just because you do something that could be seen unmoral or unethical or whatever, that does not justify you being murdered, harmed, abused, sexually assaulted, etc.
Well, one thing, and Candice, I'm not sure if you're aware of the case of Dr. Harold Shipman. He was a GP in England, in the UK, and he murdered hundreds of his elderly patients. He went unchecked for decades, and mainly because our elderly were almost like forgotten part of our society. And as a journalist, I interviewed one of the daughter of a victim of Harold Shipman, and she was almost apologetic, and she said, I know my mum was old, and I said, whoa, your mother was murdered. And she said, thank you, because there was this thing, oh, well, they were old, or they were sex workers, or they were in other eyes. And Isla, is that what you found in a lot of the cases that you've been covering? It's always, it's not happening to us, it's someone else.
I mean, even the way that news desks treat, okay, this will give you an idea. So I hadn't long been working in London, and this is not criticising the news organisation at all. This is just how it works. And I was new down working in ITN, and it was my day off. And I was kind of the lowest on the rungs of the ladder at that point. And they were like, oh, a body of a prostitute's been found in Ipswich. Would you mind going up there? They weren't bothered about it. So I get sent up there. And of course, what unraveled was the fastest killing spree in recorded criminal history. In terms of, he killed 5 women in the space of 2 weeks, which is faster even than Jack the Ripper, because that was spread over months. And without doubt, I mean, that case in particular, really brought it home to me, is that, it's awful, because the viewers, and we all are guilty of judging, and each woman was someone's daughter, and some of them were mothers and sisters, etc. And it was heartbreaking. And let's be honest, no one wants to become a sex worker. They're doing it usually out of absolute desperation. And one of the murder victims of Peter Sutcliffe, the son, is a great advocate, and he says, his mum had to do certain things to look after them, to put food on the table. She did things with men that no woman would ever want to do. And I think that's what we forget, that these are brave, courageous, and women. We should have nothing but compassion for them. And then as well, those with addiction problems, and that's another thing I could go into. I mean, addiction is absolutely horrific. It is not something you can just choose to stop doing. Your body is, you're driven by it. And then it leads down a path which does lead you into a type of life which is risky. And as Candy said, they pick off the weakest, the ones that, it's often homeless people as well, and of certain
marginalized.
And so I think, Candice, is that what Candice, you've seen the victims and families that you've been chatting to and you've featured in your podcast, they have been marginalized. That's who you're.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, being Black in itself is a marginalization, especially in America. But add in being a woman, maybe being a trans woman, maybe being LGBTQ, being poor, being uneducated, etc. I mean, there's different intersections of how things can oppress us. Like she was saying, the patriarchy, misogyny, etc. Yeah.
Isla, you worked in news. It's as I have. It's it can be quite difficult at times when you're hearing a narrative and you're hearing, you know, especially years ago, an editor sort of saying, "Oh, well, another sex worker's been killed. Can you just go and cover that?" It's pretty difficult to.
Yeah, and it wasn't a criticism at all of the organisation. It's just the reality of what viewers find interesting. And if there's an attractive woman who has a reasonable job or children, there's far more, it's just, you can't even compare it than with someone who is a prostitute. And if it was a one-off prostitute being murdered, sadly, beyond the family and the immediate ones who actually cared for that person, there's not the same, desire or interest from news organisations. And again, that's what we need to change as people. We need to become more compassionate and more empathetic to those. And what Candice said there about trans people, oh my gosh, exactly. They are if you're going to have a hierarchy there, they're the ones that get the least attention. They're the most vulnerable people in society that need actually the greatest amount of attention and support.
Now, Laura from Aberdeen has asked a question, and she said, "It's brilliant so far, thank you." Thank you, Laura. How do you make sure you can stay safe when interviewing or approaching people from the podcast? Now, I'm not sure if it actually does apply because you're approaching victims and victims' families rather than killers. But Isla, you've chatted to killers. So I'll come to you first, Isla, and then Candice. So how do you stay safe yourself when you're approaching people to interview?
Well, I mean, I've got a background in this, obviously, from my career. And also I was involved in the series Unsolved for STV. I did 3 series of that. So I have knocked on many a door of people who are prime suspects, or perhaps we know from the police that there's a suggestion that they think it's definitely that person. And then, of course, in the case of the first series, this is a convicted killer who had served her time. I mean, you just have to be sensible, but it is risky. I have I won't say which case again.
Isla, your screen, Isla, you're breaking up there. So can I'm going to go to Candice and then I'll just come back to you. So we'll just recover what you'd said. Candice, how do you stay safe? And if I can latch another question onto the back of that, how do you stay safe? But also, do you ever, as we say, rattle people's cages? Is there ever a time when the authorities don't like what you're doing, that you're maybe stirring a hornet's nest, you're causing trouble? Have you ever had that attitude?
I've actually never interviewed like a suspect or anything like that. And the people I have interviewed have been in COVID. So we've done virtual audio based, which is something I think I would implement in the future, even if we go back to not wearing masks or anything like that. As far as rattling cages, none so far, which is good because I don't want that kind of headache. So I would say I don't really have experience, doing anything or feeling like I'm in harm's way pertaining to my podcast.
And Sarah, so I'll start with you, Candice, and I'll move on to Isla. Sarah wants to know from both of you, have law enforcement agencies ever contacted you about information on your podcast that may help them with an actual case?
No, but I mean, I think that would be cool if they did. But don't subpoena me or summons me for court because I don't want that. But if they want me to push something out for more information, please contact me.
Isla, what about yourself?
Well, both my cases are solved, so not with regard to them, but the cases I don't know what you all heard earlier about the Unsolved series I did for STV.
Yes, but if you could recap on that, because you kind of broke up a little bit.
Sorry, Wi-Fi in the middle of nowhere is dreadful, but I had to go and confront people, and I have had punches thrown at me, but luckily I'm quite fast at ducking. Oh, goodness. I have definitely had some. I mean, you have to be sensible, and you never go on your own. You need to let people know where you're going. Certainly, actually, once during the research process for that documentary series, myself and an AP found ourselves in an unlikely situation. We did a kind of risk assessment before knocking on doors, and one that should not have been dodgy ended up being dodgy, and we were locked with someone who had been in a hospital for the I'm criminally insane. I don't know if that's quite the right PC way of saying it that nowadays, but certainly it was regarded as that at the time. Anyway, yes, the documentary series, yes. Tapes were obtained and have I think there was 5 cases out of the 3 series that there are now, maybe 6, that there are people behind bars, and there are 2 ongoing active cases in relation to those documentary series. So yes.
Wow, do you have a sense of pride in that? Because it's obviously a great resolution, a great outcome for your podcast.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't like necessarily directly they were putting cuffs on. I think we helped to shine light on cases that had gathering dust. I think it's really important. I mean, I think one of the worst things must be for relatives of murder victims who never get an answer. That is so hard. And my old boss at STV, who recently passed away, actually, I'd like to pay tribute to him, DJ MacDonald, who is, was a very dear friend of mine. Both of us were so incredibly proud. I mean, the detriment to our health and sleep-in lives was huge doing those series. It was massive, but we were very, very proud. And it was something that was really important to be part of and to feel like we were doing something worthwhile.
So typically, how much research goes into a podcast? How much work goes behind the scenes? How long does it take before you've got it in the can?
Okay.
First, Candice.
It takes me a while. This is why I'm like not as consistent with my posting, because I am a one-woman show. And it could take weeks, months. I mean, it's a lot to research accurate information, especially if there's not court documents or anything readily available for you to just read off of. So it could take a while for me.
I love what's your own experience? How long tend to?
Huge. I mean, I started researching, I think it was March or we were in lockdown. So probably the end of March, beginning of April, that I started on it. And then the last episode went out in December. So that gives you an idea. And my episodes they vary between they're usually about half an hour long. There's some that are longer. So, it's a huge amount. And I'll have, I think for the first series, I had about 25 hours of interviews. So if you imagine, it's not like something visual. You can look in a video and where there's a car crash, use that bit. I have to listen to it all. I have to catalogue it all. And then it's like, this is the thing I love, is weaving the story and telling the best way and unraveling it, leaving a bit of mystery and suspense as you go along. So it's a huge project. I wanted to mention, actually, the guy who's asking about doing his own podcast, if you're doing it, do it because you're really passionate about it. Do not do it to make money. Not many people know this, but I don't get paid by anyone to do this. A lot of my work just got wiped out because of COVID, and actually found I wanted to do it, but I don't get paid to do it. And you can get some revenue from advertising, but it doesn't really cover the costs of your edit system and your mics, and I mean, never mind your time. The benefit for me, though, is, of course, then it leads on to other projects, which there'll be news coming out about soon, hopefully. But do it because you're passionate about it. Don't think it's going to make you money. If you're Joe Rogan, yes. Oprah, yes. If you're doing a crime podcast, highly unlikely.
Candice, is it a labor of love for you as well?
Absolutely. But even if I do make money from this, I want it to go to victims anyway, in some capacity. So that's my goal when I do get some income streaming in, that I do want to put at least a portion of it to victims, families, billboards, rewards, et cetera. But I agree with you 100%. If you're doing true crime, especially fact-based, it needs to be from a labor of love as well.
Girls, I have to say, sadly, we've been called to time. Can you believe that's our
wow.
So all it remains for me to say is that thank you to Candice Gaines and Isla Traquair, and of course a huge thank you to the organisers who pulled out all the stops to get the festival online, and a special mention to our BSL interpreter Leslie. Now, all Granite Noir events are free to view, but please do consider leaving a donation to Aberdeen Performing Arts, and that supports the ongoing work of Granite Noir. Just click on the link of any of the Granite Noir pages and you can visit the website for more info. So I hope you can attend some more events, and all events will remain online so you can view them at your leisure. So for me, from now, and from Candice and from Isla, goodbye and stay safe.
Bye.
Thank you.